thank you for coming out, and thank you, Elle there, for introducing Alicia and the whole team here at Richmond Size on Ice, and appreciate the new Greyhound lead vet from Greyhound Racing New South Wales, and he's turned up tonight, which is fantastic to get some support for the industry. Bottom line is we're trying to minimise injuries and improve our dogs. It's actually the owners and trainers who have to actually step up for it. So we're going to go through a process that I've worked with a couple of other veterinarians, Peter, John, a guy called John Katakasi from South Australia, which I'll introduce. Marky Saddlery was the one who we did the design with Dr. Meg Brownlow for the Hock strap that's now being trialled and getting very good feedback from trainers. So the impact of fractures on you guys, owners and trainers, well, it's emotional. I mean, it's sad when you lose your animals. It's frustrating when you lose animals, and you get angry at times because sometimes it's out of your control what happens. It's financial, it's expensive. Everything involved in the industry now has gone up in price, like most other things. And kennel space is an issue now because there's and rightly so or wrongly so, I'm not judging, but you can't, euthanasia is not an option anymore for the greyhound industry. The rehoming is great, but sometimes it takes a while to get an animal to go back in a rehoming situation, and small trainers with 6 to 8 kennels in a garage sort of setup, they struggle when they've got to keep bringing through new product. I want to make this point, and it's good that Greyhound Racing New South Wales is here, because when they first brought out the injury rebate scheme, which was fantastic, this has allowed the most catastrophic fractures used to be the Hock fractures, catastrophic meaning dogs were euthanized, but now they don't get euthanized. There is a rebate system which started in April 2019. It was about a year after Victoria was the first state in Australia to introduce it, which was great because it's expensive to fix these injuries. There's a classic oblique fracture above the carpus, radial fracture. But unfortunately, in the 1st of July 2023, they renamed the scheme and they stopped paying for greyhounds that fracture in unofficial trials at racetracks. So these are dogs that are getting ready for racing. The bottom line is every starter in New South Wales, because there's a $3 billion gambling turnover for greyhound racing in New South Wales alone, approximately 100,000 starters a year, every time your dog runs, it's generating $30,000 in gambling turnover. So that's $240,000 per race, $2.4 million per race meeting, 10-dog race meeting. So there's a significant amount of money being generated. You guys are providing the product, and at times it's financially very challenging for you. So that's why we're approaching it from your situation, your life situation with it, trying to help you guys. Are Hock fractures preventable? Well, this is the big question. This is what we're going to talk about tonight. This is an exploded Hock, the worst type. The central tarsal is here, the most common fractured bone. It's exploded. They call this a type 5 collapse fracture. The other bone next to it, the T4, which is here, it's collapsed as well. Instead of being a 2-story structure, it's now dropped down to 1 story. So that's blown out there, that's blown out there. This dog needs a plate, screw. This dog would have always been euthanized in the past. The chances of returning successfully to racing depends on the age at which fractures occur. The average age when dogs do fracture their legs or their hocks is 12 months after they start racing. The average age when dogs start racing is 2 years of age. So the average Hock fracture is 3. If a dog is already 3.5, most of your trainers realise another 6 to 9 months bringing them back brings them up to 4.5, which most of you agree that fellas starting to get too old because their other muscles start to tighten up. They start getting secondary injuries, especially Gracilis or your back muscle tears. So we're going to be talking about that tonight and how we can think of not only solving Hock fractures but also Gracilis tears, which is the biggest muscle injury that ends a lot of dogs' careers. The right Hock is fractured 95% of the time. Why is this? This here, where the ligaments at the back of the hock rupture, that's called a plantar ligament rupture. The fancy name is the proximal intertarsal. That's the proximal intertarsal joint. This is the middle intertarsal, that's the distal tarso-metatarsal joint. So that's just a fancy name. This bone, big calcaneus here, which is like the rudder off the hock, the Achilles and the big tendon and the calf muscles join onto here. And this is how the hock is steered, by this calcaneus. And they have ligaments at the back called the plantar ligaments. And in this dog, they've ruptured. We're finding with radiography that before they rupture, there's changes occur in these bones, which we'll mention at the end. So radiography can be helpful in helping predict whether a dog's going to have an injury. And it's also a good idea before you buy an expensive dog is to get its Hock's X-ray to make sure there's not a problem already there. So you can actually debate the price and whether you want to pursue the investment. This injury is becoming more common. In the USA study, now admittedly there's only one state, I think it's West Virginia, that still races in the US of A, but over 30% of hock fractures have this ruptured plantar ligament. And we are seeing more of this. Chris Papantonio from the Liverpool clinic there, he reports more of this. John Katakasi in South Australia is seeing more of this. Now this may have to do with track redesign. I don't want to get into that one tonight at this stage. And the other one I want to talk about is the sleeper. This is a chip off the stopper bone. So this is a stopper bone fracture. And I want to talk about how we can actually prevent these, because this injury and damage to the stopper bone, damage to the tendon that come into the stopper bone, they're niggly little injuries. They can make a good dog into only a fair dog. You can't do a lot of circle work with these dogs. A lot of their careers get shortened, and some of these dogs will have chronic pain, arthritic pain, because of damage, because this is in the joint, this area here. So we're going to talk about that one tonight as well. So what are you trainers expected to do? Well, GWIC actually put out a prevention measures for serious injuries in racing only about 4 or 5 months ago, saying it's important for trainers to regularly assess their greyhounds for the presence of hock pain. That's right. But what education are you receiving? Have you received any information on how to check for hock pain? Put your hand up if you have. That's what I thought. So they're telling you this is what you should be doing, yet there's no education occurring at this stage. Despite GWIC's foundation, when the GWIC was brought in 2018 after they, in response to the BED trying to shut the industry down, their major commitment was we want to work to reduce the incidence and severity of greyhound injuries. However, since 2018, the serious injuries have actually increased by 100% from 2018 to 2023. This is in the GWIC quarterly injury reports. They're open on the website, they're easy to read. And in the last 12 months, in this winter quarter, there's serious injuries. Now, serious injuries are fractures. I spent 22 years as an on-track vet, and I also, fortunately in those days, I was allowed to treat animals and do the repairs the following couple of days. These days, OTVs in New South Wales, and I think most states of Australia, are not allowed to work with greyhounds in a private capacity outside of the tracks, which is a shame, because they're missing out on seeing these injuries, picking up these injuries, and actually helping trainers develop repairs. So the injury rate has increased. So what education has already been supplied? I think we've assessed not much. So we're trying to make a difference. This Save Your Dog's Hock 2024, we developed it with Peter Yore. John Newell's come on board recently, and John Katakasi. This is there's a website available now, which actually didn't come up for some reason, Greyhound Tarsal Screening. It's got a story about the vets involved. It's got the six-step hock check that we're going to talk about, and radiographic positions, and also the strapping video and how to check the hock for you guys at home as well. We've already presented this in Western Australia beginning of last year. I presented on the radiographic aspect in New Zealand last year. I went to the international, this was with John Katakasi. Most of this work I presented with John Katakasi. Peter Yore and John Yore don't like leaving Hunter Valley these days. But anyway, we went to Ireland at the International Sports Medicine Conference and just presented 2 months ago. Goldman was the first racetrack seminar, and now Richmond's the second one for this year. So who's involved? I've already mentioned it. These old fellas, they've all got grey hair except Peter's got no hair. This is at the Lake Macquarie. Actually, when I was a new graduate, my first job interview as a veterinarian was with these guys. I turned up with a suit. John had a t-shirt on, no mask. He had gloves on. He was screwing a dog's hock. Peter was on his little piano chair at the back checking dogs. He was the piano man. They took me to lunch. We had a bottle of wine. They said, "You want the job?" I said, "Yep." So I started that afternoon. I think I stitched up a dog that had been ripped up by had been in another dog attack. So that was my interest, my welcome. And I've worked with these guys on and off. We still consult. We still discuss cases. We were probably at that stage. The greyhound industry was massive, as you probably all know who've been through that era. There's so many trainers in those days. It was an easier time generally in life. And we not only fixed a lot of problems, but we thought about ways of trying to prevent problems too. And that led as the foundation for the work we're presenting on tonight. They put out this racing DVD. Did everyone see that? It was pretty classic. It was a 2-volume set. One indeed, they self-promoted it. They see Peter didn't change. John looks a lot different now. And that was excellent. I got a lot of information. That came out in 1989. Probably the best piece of greyhound information for trainers, talking about injuries and how to treat the injuries, times off, spelling times, everything like that. It was groundbreaking sort of work. This is John Katakasi. And I know John. He's based in South Australia. He loves fishing. He took me out on his boat. Unfortunately, I get seasick, but I still managed to handle a bit of fishing. It was all right. Sickness pills. He's got a great CT machine. He has CT'd more hocks and wrists, greyhound wrists, than the rest of the world put together. He's got an amazing library. He was starting to do 4-view radiography. I was doing 4-view radiography because I was working with horses when I first graduated as well. I was working with John Newell. We did the racetrack up there in Newcastle. Standard greyhound x-rays were just taking 2 views, 90 degrees apart. We started doing 4 views and then correlating it with CT work, and that's how we made a lot of our breakthroughs with interpreting x-rays. If you look at CTs and then you look at 4 views of x-rays, actually 4 views of x-rays is closer to a CT than a 2-view x-ray. CT is basically 180 degrees of x-rays, so it gives you a 3-dimensional view. If you're used to looking at 3 dimensions, then suddenly going to 2 dimension, you can suddenly see more. Does that make sense? So we've been educating vets over the last couple of years, quite actively online for the Australian Greyhound Vet List. So the aim today to empower trainers, owners and veterinarians. So this work, we're pushing it upon vets as well. The veterinary industry is interesting because you have 2 extremes. You have the OTVs, which we know that are doing the work at the track, and they haven't had a lot of injury experience, so they sometimes will struggle. And sometimes the dog's got to cool down to the next day until some injuries are obvious, so it can be frustrating. Then you've got orthopedic surgeons, specialists who are now involved, because a lot of dogs, when they get injured, have to go to after hours cares now, and a lot of their work will then get sent to specialists. And in between, those who are looking at preventing injury, you can probably count them on 3 fingers. Okay? And they're the ones who are involved in the 4 fingers, if you include John as well. So we want to talk about why the right hock is so vulnerable to fracture. Why is it 95% of the time? How the hock bone's impacted by the muscles and the soft tissues associated. It's not just the hock. It's the muscles that feed the hock area that can be strained and overloaded and leading to the hock fracture. How do you examine the hind leg? The role of strapping, the role of radiography, and also we're going to touch on the vulnerabilities of the wrist. This is the first time this has been presented, the wrist work that you're going to get tonight. There's the website. So a lot of this stuff is on the website. Greyhound tarsal screening. Tarsal is another name for hock. Screening, well, set up. We do a lot of online radiographic interpretation. We don't charge for people to present x-rays. Acknowledge the problem. Now this is GWIC's own review panel. and their quarterly response, 2023. This is now 5 years after we've been looking at injury data in New South Wales, and almost 80% of the major 2 and catastrophic injuries occur on the corner in New South Wales. So the corner is where the problem is. What's going on here? Is it just interference? Is it just this? Well, if it was just this, dogs wouldn't break their hocks on single dog trials. Dogs wouldn't break their hocks if they were just going around by themselves without interference. So it's not just this. This used to be the sole explanation. Now we're looking at track conditions. Now everyone will have a little different opinions there. I'm going to mention a couple of aspects about tracks, especially now that I used to do Cessnock, which was a grass track. I used to do Beaumont Park, which was a grass track before it became, and then before it became the Gardens, which was grass. I did Gosford, which was grass, and then became sand. I did Maitland, which I think was always sand. Definitely with grass tracks, and those have been in the industry long enough, you have much less hock fractures. You do a lot more toes, a lot more metacarpals, because you're getting caught in the grass, but you're not getting the sinking and the over-rotation that's occurring on the sand. So there's ways of making sand tracks safer, and we're going to look at some of those tonight. Some people may want to throw ideas in as well, because I think this is what the industry needs to be spending time on. Now there's also weakness in the dog. Now, loss of bone density, it's been established, research has shown, and now this has been recognised by Greyhound Veterinarian Association, it's been recognised internationally, that when that bone fractures, that little central tarsal one, I showed you the x-ray where it exploded, it loses 35% of its bone density before it explodes. That means that bone was being overloaded for a period of time. Because bone, when it's damaged, the cells that get rid of the damaged cell, the damaged bone, they get rid of that bone in 3 to 5 days. But new bone doesn't get put in there for up to sort of potentially 6 to 8 weeks. So bone's getting damaged, and you're not picking up the early signs of early bone damage. The hocks are going to progress to where they get to this explosive phase. So that's where we're going to be looking at tonight. The other one we're going to be looking at is the damage to the supporting tissues, the damage to the plantar ligament, the damage that can occur in the calf muscles and the thigh muscles that put the pressure on the hock. That's what we need to be focusing on, not just thinking about the bones. Now the right hock is fractured, as we've said. Now look at this track. You can see his back right leg. Now, the next slide will show this even more clearly, but for dogs, the back legs at the hocks are turned out at 25 degrees. So when they run in a straight line, I'll go to this one. So when they run in a straight line, they don't want their back legs hitting their front legs. So anatomy, there's the hock, there's the hinge joint there, the major hinge joint. All the injuries occur lower down here, by the way. The hinge joint hardly ever gets injured in the racing greyhound, but the hinge joint is turned out at 25 degrees so that when they run in a straight line it's fine. But then when they hit a corner, the left leg is already turned in at 25 degrees. The right leg has to rotate by at least 25 degrees for the dog to get around the corner. So what is happening when this leg twists? Well, it's putting a massive twist through the tendons, the massive twist through the calf muscles, massive twist to the thigh muscles, massive twist in the lower back and the psoas. There's no wonder that the majority of serious injuries in the racing greyhound are in the right back leg. Not just the hock, not just the calf, but the back muscle. That is 60% of the back muscle injuries are in the right leg, and the lower back is injured more so. Okay? Let's just go back to that one. So that's the right hind. So the right hind's there, hits the ground, it has to twist in for the dog to keep going in circle. And the major muscle that's involved with twisting the leg in is the back muscle, the gracilis. So the gracilis is a very hard working muscle because it's going to work to bring that leg in all the time. That's a big factor. And the other factor that's happening is with sand tracks, gravity. Water. So if you've got the inside, you've got cambered tracks. Now we've had a fascination to increase the camber on tracks, thinking that dogs, because they were designed thinking that dogs are trained to go around corners. So we put a bit of a slope, makes it easier, but it forgets about the fact that the legs are already having to twist in. Now this dog, look at this here, this is quite wet here. Look out there. I just walked over to the Richmond track now, and the first 3 dogs to the rail was quite dark in colour, and further out is dry. What does that mean? Well, it means the railing side legs, the front left and the rear left, that's in firm sand, so they don't really sink. It's like running on the beach, having those left legs on the firm and putting your right legs, the outside leg, which is doing all the work here by the way, is now on dry sand. And if it's dry sand, what happens? It sinks. You can sink, and therefore if you've got a sinking leg, it actually even works harder. So the right hind leg is already the hardest working leg, because to go around a corner, if you're not aware of this, you will now. When a dog goes up the straight, its left hind leg is doing all the drive. When it switches onto a corner, its right leg becomes the drive leg. So it's driving, it's doing all the pushing, it's twisting in as well. Plus the chances of that the dog drifts wide on a sand track, that it might be in heavier dry sand. This is causing the catastrophes. Okay, so we've got these factors here. So we've got camber, we've got torsion that's occurring already, and then you add a bit of interference. Suddenly the dog's foot's in the ground and is hit, it suddenly will over-rotate even further. By the way, the right front leg on the outside, more of the injuries, as far as the most fractured leg in the dog, it's the right hind, and the second one is the right front leg. There's more fractures in the right front leg than the left front and the left back together, okay? And that's because the front leg is having to overstretch because it's going around a bigger circle. That makes sense? Any questions on that? No. I've shown you that one. Early signs of a problem then in the right hind leg. Well, if your dog starts to slow or run wide on a corner, it's not pushing. So something that is affecting the function of that leg if this starts happening. And then when you examine the leg, it seems to be stiff. Now where's this stiffness coming from? Is it the hock or is it the muscles associated with it? So that's why we've come up with a bit of an instructional plan. This video was made and we launched it at Goulburn about, I think it was 6 weeks ago at least, was it? 6 weeks ago. There's a collaboration, we all got involved producing this. I'll show you some of it.
The top white mark is on the obvious bump at the base of the fibula, which marks the tibiotarsal joint. The red dot at the front of the hock marks the central tarsal bone, which is the most commonly fractured bone in the hock. The descending weight through the leg goes through the talus and into the central tarsal bone, which explains its overload. The lower white dot marks the bottom of the hock, as the large bump is the top of metatarsal 5. Range of motion testing is started with the back by lifting up and gently pushing down for bounce. Also, the base of the tail can be held to check for side flexion. Assess hip mobility, straight back stretch for cranial hip muscles, internal rotation of stifle for psoas muscle, and lifting of stifle for abductor muscle. Hock flexion or compression test is undertaken with left hand on top of stifle and right hand cupping the foot. Push your hands together to assess the range of motion and presence of bouncy elastic endpoint. Stiffness here may indicate problems in the hock structure, calf muscles or the Achilles tendon. Always compare to the left side. Assess the range of motion in the Gracilis muscle by hand on the hock stretch forward and outwards. Left hand can palpate muscle at the same time. The connection between the gracilis and the hock is the actual calf muscles. To assess their mobility, left hand on stifle, right hand on hock pushing forward and check for the elastic endpoint, and palpate up through the muscles between the gastrocs. The superficial digital flexor is usually very tight. Contraction here overloads the plantar ligaments. Most early fractures in the hock start at the front. So we palpate down the front with the leg loaded on the ground. Use a bouncy pressure to go down each tarsal line into the metatarsals, left and right. Pain found on bone pressure of the front of the hock may indicate the presence of a bone crack or be secondary to excess contraction in the plantar ligaments or calf muscles. Radiography is useful to differentiate the cause. Check for laxity or looseness in the compressive sleeve of the hock by finding the thickened tissue that supports the longitudinal tendon, the long digital extensor. Compare one side to the other. This one is loose by about 1 centimetre on the right hand side. Strapping will assist stabilising this laxity and support the underlying bones. The red dot on the back of the hock marks the plantar ligaments, and a test for the tension or contraction in those is called the metatarsal torsion test. To perform this test, one hand holding above the hock and the other one rotating below on the metatarsals.
So we're going to go through, there's a fair bit there. We're going to go through some of the most important aspects in my opinion. This is all available on the website, Hock Flexion. You all know that, that's the standard hock. The main thing is you've got to cup the foot with your hand and pushing down, and not just press once, but actually bounce, because you actually want to see, it's like extending your own elbow to 180 degrees and then move past it to see if it's got flexibility or bounce, right? Because if you don't have flexibility or bounce when you do that, that may not mean stiffness in the hock, it could be the Achilles or the calf muscle is tight, which is actually more common, okay? Pressure on the front bones when you're feeling for low-grade bone pain, because all the cracks, the CT work of Katakasi has shown this, that all the cracks in the hock start at the front. So if you're going to palpate anywhere for bone pain, you've got to have the leg under load, because that increases the sensitivity with the dog. If you lift the dog's foot up and you palpate it, it won't be sore. Same when you're checking for a crack in the metacarpal. You lift up the other dog's front leg and palpate the metacarpal, and he's sore and trying to lift his leg up with that leg down, you know you've got a problem, okay? So the leg has to be loaded. And you palpate using your thumb, you go down start at the top of the hock, go all the way down the metatarsals as well, because the left side one, the outer metatarsal in T4, that is a really common crack that a lot of people are missing. And the dogs just aren't performing well, but you've got to feel it. The pain's obvious when you feel it. If you don't feel it, you won't know it's there. Assess laxity. We're going to show you this test specifically. That's where there's a tendon that comes down the front, and we're checking for movement in that tendon, which is actually the attachment of the whole sleeve. The joint capsule, the tendons, and the ligaments underneath are all joined like a big sock that runs from here all the way down to here. And that tendon at the front is an easy landmark to push against to see if it's loose. And that's the foundation for the hock strap. We feel that, we're feeling sensitivity and looseness here, that's what the strapping is supporting. Metatarsal torsion, this was John Katakasi came up with this test, which is great. It's like using a throttle on a motorbike. If you've actually got stiffness and pain in this area, especially just stiffness, you go to rotate it and it won't move. If you've got pain in there as well, then you've got to x-ray, because this is where we're getting some early changes that will predispose to really catastrophic fractures. So, and the calf extension, that's where your hand is on the hock, the other hand at the front of the knee or the stifle, and push forward. So we're stretching for the calf. And we always compare one side to the other. We'll talk about how to release that tension, massage and that. But there's quite a few trainers here tonight, I see their dogs already. And this is when you're palpating the calf muscle to follow the Achilles. And then the main calf muscle, the problem the greyhounds get, is the muscle that goes right up the centre between these two bellies. The gastrocs are on the outside, but the one up the centre, the superficial digital flexor one, that's the one that gets the knots. And if we can deactivate that, we can take the pressure off the hock. Now there's a bit more detail on these, which I'll follow up, but it's all online. Now this 6-step hock check, we were actually asked by the Australian Greyhound Veterinary Group to provide guidelines for vets. These are OTV vets, on-track vets, who have to perform a clearance certificate for greyhounds returning to race after a prior injury. Because the majority of hock fractures, the dogs are older. They've already been racing for 12 months. Majority of hock fractures are dogs that have already had another injury. They're coming back from a pin injury, they're coming back from a Gracilis injury or a hip support injury. And the fact that they've been let down and not stretching or working anymore means that the hock muscles and the ligaments and the calf become contracted. That's why we're getting hock injuries after time off. That's why they need to perform a clearance certificate for a dog to come back to race. We need to be checking these 6 steps, okay? This was presented at the annual general meeting of the AGWSDV, fancy name for Australian Greyhound Group. It's now the Australian Greyhound Working and Sporting Dog Veterinarian, so a bit of a mouthful. So all vets have been supplied with this six-step Hock check, bit of a tongue twister, and also internationally as well. So, and you trainers need to do it as well if you want to make a difference. Now, this is always a disclaimer. It's not a replacement for local veterinary consult, but may assist trainers to seek immediate veterinary attention. Like a dog in there, I had a chip fracture in the stopper bone, accessory carpal. It was sore. The guy goes, oh, I'll give it 2 to 3 weeks off. Then he brought it to me, X-ray, there was a chip. We took the chip out today. So some of these injuries, you don't want to let them go for 2 to 3 days, 2 to 3 weeks. So this will help you work out, okay, what is serious? What do I need to get further investigation, especially radiography now that we've pinpointed a lot where these injuries start. All 6 steps, obviously, perform gently and with full awareness to detect pain and never to cause pain. The 6-step Hock check, well, that's to be used in association with that examination video, because the video moves quite quickly, but you can slow down at your own leisure. Each step is now the technique, shows you how to go through it, so you can do it at your own leisure, shows what the findings are. If there is stiffness with no pain, then the problem will likely be fatigue contraction in the plantar ligaments or calf and medial thigh muscles. These muscles in the back leg of the greyhound, especially the right side, you work a dog, you run it, they get a bit stiff, and then you walk him or you swim him. That muscle tightness is still there. You go to run him again a week later, he's 20% of that muscle is already still contracted. It's a fatigue contraction, we're calling it. So then he runs off again, tightens up again, another 10% is tightened. So eventually 4 weeks later, if you haven't checked, you're not checking your dogs properly, or you're not even looking for these, because some people aren't. Immediately they're just running dogs twice a week for the performance money, you know. So, but these muscles, especially the calf and the thigh muscles, and this includes the back muscle, the gracilis, these muscles tighten before they tear. They do suddenly tear. They tighten before they turn. This tightening can happen anywhere between 1 to 6 weeks beforehand. So that gives you a window. You should be checking your dogs every 24 hours after they cool down. You should be checking them. And it doesn't matter if you're not sure what you're doing. At least you can follow these steps that we've tried to make them as helpful for not just you guys, but for vets as well. There's the pressure on the front of the bones. It tells you if you get the cracks, if pain persists, if you do, because this pain at the front commonly can be due to contraction in the calf muscle. We'll show you how to release the calf. And then if you go back and the pain is gone, well, that's because the calf muscle is causing it. Because the calf pulls up, the Achilles pulls up, and all of a sudden the hock becomes more vertical, and then it becomes more painful when it's vertical. It's like wearing high heels. You're going to get more pain than when you're having flats. And that's what's happening to the right hock. It's being lifted by the calf and the thigh muscles, so it starts to get painful here, and that's where the crumbling occurs. So if you release the calf, the pain goes away, and it's not a crack. Right? It's not a crack. Move forward. You can run the dog in 2 to 3 days. If the pain is still there, you've got to get the dog x-rayed. Otherwise, you're going to have a collapsed fracture potentially in 2 to 6 weeks. This is what we're trying to get the point. I'm not just pushing x-rays. I'm just telling you there's a pathway to know when an x-ray is useful. Not every dog needs an x-ray. This is the assessment of the laxity. That's the tendon itself, the long digital extensor tendon that goes here. It's also another little tendon that comes and goes across the central tarsal bone. And these 2 tendons act like a seat belt. One at the front, one across the side. The central tarsal bone, which is just on the other side of my thumb, which is the most common fracture. It's when those tendons get stretched, they stop holding the central tarsal bone in at the front. Especially if the central tarsal is now standing taller because the calf and the Achilles is pulling it upright. So it loads it, and this is predisposing. This is why we're strapping hocks. If you wondered why we're pushing the hock strap and strapping, this is why. And actually, the potential likely benefits of hock strapping have recently been acknowledged by GWIC in their prevention measures for serious injuries in racing. So hats off to Greyhound Racing New South Wales for introducing the Hock strap trial, the Velcro strap, and well done for GWIC to come on board as well. So both sides of administrators, as we know in this state, sometimes they don't always get on together, but this at least there's agreement with this issue, very important issue. Metatarsal torsion, I think it's more like using a motorbike throttle. It tells you how to do it. Then the strict, and when this is stiff too, it can also be due to the Achilles and the calf being tight and the thigh muscle. So you've got to rule that out first before you think, oh, it's a primary Hock problem. Calf extension, I went through that explanation. And then the palpation, this is the most important one. And when you palpate this muscle using thumb pressure, you've got to go right up, you've got to come all the way up to the back of the knee. Because they can have sometimes not one, not two, but up to 4 separate little knotted areas where it's not damaged fibres, it's just the fibres have contracted and are locked. We call that fatigue contraction. You notice your own calf muscles. If you guys have got, if anyone here's got plantar fasciitis, has anyone got that? If they get heel pain and pain under the foot, a lot of people get relief by releasing and massaging out your calf muscles. Okay? Works exactly the same in humans as it does with greyhounds. Treatment options, when you get these contracted muscles, right? This is any muscles anyway. Deactivate the spasm, massage or acupressure. You can use laser. You can use veterinary acupuncture, veterinary injections. Now you deactivate the spasm, and the other critical thing is restoring the range of motion with passive and controlled stretching. And that's critical with the calf one, where you massage out the tightness in the back of the calf and then you stretch the calf. Same with the neck, same with the shoulder. This is a little video on the Gracilis. I'll just put the volume up a bit. Just to assessing the Gracilis or the back muscles. This is the left one here, right one. This is the bottom of the muscle belly before it begins the fascia stretch that joins all the way down onto the inside of the tibia, and also then the sheath comes down and joins into the Achilles. Now checking for tone in this one, you palpate up here and there's a hardness. The dog's a bit sore. Compare it to the other side. It should be soft all the way up. Okay, we can stretch that one forward like I showed in the range of motion testing on our examination one that's up on the website. But yeah, that one there. So we're going to put dry needle on. Now, the Gracilis is a really easy muscle to check, just like that. You stand behind it, it's only about that long, but its connections go all the way down the inside of that back of the tibia there, so the back of the calf, and also down into the Achilles. That's why it's such an overloaded muscle. As I was saying, it's the muscle that contracts to pull the leg in, to internally rotate, which is why it's so. So when you feel that muscle there, you palpate it, you feel for any just consistency of tone. And that one side was hard, one side was soft. It's as simple as that. That's what you should be doing. If you're going to check only one muscle in your dog, check the Gracilis or the back muscle. Many people have dogs with back muscle ruptures. Now, this is getting onto the strapping. The keys to effective strapping. One is to check to see whether the dog actually needs it. Now, with the Right Hock, because they're running anti-clockwise and the leg has to rotate in, the stretching occurs in that direction too. So they loosen to the inside, to the anti-clockwise. And that's why when you strap, you want to go back the other way. So this is the Right Hock, right leg, Right Hock. Start the strapping there, go back behind and pull it forward and pull it back in a clockwise direction to restore that looseness that's there. There's a video on our website that shows you how to put the Velcro strap on. It's the same if you're using Elastoplast. I think Elastoplast works fine. I think Vetrac put on really, really tightly can be effective as well. The Velcro is good because the Velcro Hock strap is good because it doesn't pull off hair. But you've got to put it on tight, otherwise you're wasting your time. Okay? Now there's the indications, because you've got looseness here of the tendon. You've got laxity of the sleeve. The whole sock between here and here is called the sleeve. The tarsal sleeve or the hock sleeve. In the front it's called the wrist sleeve or the carpal sleeve, which is basically like a football sock that's elasticized. At the end of the season, the socks don't stay up as they're stretched because you've played so many games. This is the strap. It got launched at the Greyhound Industry Future Summit. It was the injury minimisation strategy, the first one they've started. They've now, I don't know if everyone saw a Facebook announcement last week, they've just recruited an associate professor from Melbourne University, Helen Davis, who I actually know. We've corresponded with Helen in the development of our theories about laxity, looseness of hocks and wrists. So she's actually very knowledgeable. They're using her because they want to get an academic involved, which I think is a good idea. Got to thank Meg Brownlow. Meg has actually been instrumental in developing cooling principles for both horses and with racing greyhounds. And there's probably a link from dog to overheating and secondary stress, secondary acidosis issues, secondary kidney problems. So I think there's a lot to learn from Meg, and she's preparing guidelines for greyhound racing in New South Wales or through GWIC, I'm sure is Arsena, on cooling dogs effectively. So she pursued this, she prepared this pamphlet, and Greyhound Racing published it and handed it out to all their trainers involved in the trial. The trial is still ongoing. They're now giving out straps, I think, which is great. Support for hock strapping. Well, as I said, GWIC and Greyhound Racing are now supporting it, which is great. Leading trainers have come on board. I would just adjust that volume. This is Andy Lord, and this is what he had to say.
I tested the hock bandage for approximately 4 weeks for the trials on one of my perform pitchers who's had a lot of trouble with a offside hock tendon, to the point where she was, especially cold and here, she was running right off the track, probably 6 dogs off the fence, and now she's down to 1 dog off the fence, and it'll probably save her racing career, because dogs that have had problems with the tendons that are continuous, it just seems to hold it in place and she can get around the track a bit better. And I've also tested her on a couple of pups that were moving off the track, and they've come in a fair bit, so I think it's a great thing, the hock bandage.
Now Andy's a very astute trainer. Before this video was made, I'd never met the guy or even had a conversation with the guy. I've since then have spoken to him and met him. But that tendon he's talking about, the hock tendon, is that tendon down the front, long digital extensor tendon, the seat belt. We call it the half seat belt, part of the seat belt for the bones at the front. So when it's loose, he was picking up that it was loose, and he checks his dog obviously. He picked it up, he's used the strap, and then all of a sudden the dog wants to rail better. If the dog rails better, what happens? It runs faster, because there's a lesser path to get around. It's simple as that. So it's pretty simple. Is there any side effects with strapping? No. Do you strap every dog's right hock? No. Is it a problem strapping it? No. So if you're not sure, or if your dog starts running off and you're getting that sensitivity at the front that disappears when you rub out the calf, but it gets sore again, that's when these dogs need strapping. Okay? That's why people are trialling it. There's other trainers who are finding the same thing. Now, we'll just talk a little bit about radiography to show you what we can see, to say this is a sign that this demineralisation. Now, I'll just show you. So this is the central tarsal bone here, shaped like a teacup. This is the bone that fractures. When a dog does a hock, that bone is pretty well always fractured. Sometimes this one's fractured too, sometimes the one beside it, the long one that goes from here to here, behind it, that's the outline of it. The T4, that's fractured as well. That's the most common combined fracture. So let's have a look at what these x-rays show us. This bone here, when a dog runs, its bone inside, which is called the trabecula, it's like honeycomb. When they first start racing, the bones are pretty black inside because the honeycomb is not calcified. But as you put more weight and load on it, the calcium gets deposited onto the honeycomb. Now here, this one here, this is the calcaneus, or the one that, the big rudder that I'm saying, but its load is not vertical, its load is twisting. And that's why all the calcium is building up there. The load here, this is the talus that comes onto the central tarsal. This is the load, that's why that bone is getting white, because it's getting vertical load. Now we look at this one over here. If this suddenly had been white, but now it's starting to dissolve there, and it looks like there's a bit of a hole there. This is called demineralisation. This is what happens before it spreads and affects more of the bone and makes it more susceptible to fracture. They're the bones. This is the bone that loses 35% before it totally gives way. It doesn't always have to. Sometimes you get little cracks at the front. Let me show you what this looks like on a CT. So there's the same one again. This is the X-ray. As soon as you do a CT, CT is basically, it gives you a slice, a vertical slice that's only about 1 mil thick, and that shows you, this one here, this shows you that there was a crack there. See, there's that hole, and there's a crack that was there in the bone. You can see how white that bone is. You see all the whitenesses here too, so that's the vertical load. That tells you why we get our cracks on the front of the central tarsal, the front of the bone below it, the T3, and the front of that, top of that metatarsal 3. The middle one, they're the most common fractures in the right back leg. Those 3 bones, 1, 2 and 3. This also shows you another CT, another 5 mil out, shows you there's a hole there as well. So there's a hole there, and there's a crack there. Now we can't see the crack, but we can see the suspicion about it. So do we need to do CTs on these all the time? No. But we now know that what CT looks like. We can then see that, go, okay, this dog needs to be spelled, or we're thinking about other surgeries where we need to fuse this area to stop this bone from just blowing up, breaking apart. If you're going to buy a dog that looks like that, you seriously negotiate the price. Because he may not have many races in him before he gets injured. Now this is the other one. We see the front, this is the plantar ligament. The plantar ligaments run from the rudder, the calcaneus, down onto the back of T4 with the big bone like that, and also onto the central tarsal, which is a teacup shape. They go to there and there. Now this here, just go back to the previous one. This is what it normally should look like. It should just be white, even through. There's a little bit of blackness there, but it's generally white there, definitely white through there. But this one, it's got this growing on it. What's that? Well, we worked out that this is actually calcification, that the tendon has been injured. Now the tendon at the back, the plantar ligaments, it's like a hose that you stretch out when you run, and then you roll it up at night, and it's kinked. And because it's kinked, the collagen or the fibres in it cross-match, and they get stuck, so they're stiff. When you do the motorcycle throttle test, I said the metatarsal test, this would feel stiff, which it did. This dog ended up spelled for a bit, would try to race it again, and it ruptured. Because the ligament has lost its flexibility, like an elastic band. If it's got to stretch that far to be effective, and then half of it suddenly gets knotted up, and you go to stretch it as much as you normally would, what happens? It snaps. That's a snapped. That's where it is here. That was there, so that's snapped off there. That just snapped off here. This bone here should be lined up. That bone suddenly pulled back. This is the worst sort of injury you can get, because you need this. You need a plate at both sides, because it's a totally unstable hock. These dogs never return back to racing. It's a disastrous injury. We save these legs now at least, but sometimes when they rupture, I've seen them where they actually tear the artery and they actually get a gangrenous leg. I've seen 2 of those in the last probably 8 years, but not that common. I've seen the ruptures very common, and in the US study, remember 30% of greyhound fractures that are occurring there, because I suspect in the US there is no veterinarians and there's no muscle men checking dogs. They're just running dogs without realising the tension that's building up in the calf muscles, the thigh muscles, including the gracilis. The plantar ligament just overloads, because everything else, this here, the Achilles, the calf, the muscles up here are all gone in, overloaded, overworked. They're in spasms. No one's working on them. So the only bit that has to give, that can even stretch a bit, is this plantar ligament here, and it's already beyond what it can do, and so it ruptures. That's the weakest point in the chain. Now this is showing you what we're finding with these 4 different views, the oblique views. This is the left hock. There's a crack. Now you'd only pick this crack up if you're doing that load with the dog standing there and you palpate, press down the bones of the hock to see if they get any pain. You find this regularly, you x-ray him, this dog's got a crack there. This dog will not perform if he's got a crack there. You just, because it's his left back leg, he still rails okay. He still corners. You think, oh, he's cornering times, but he's just not trying something. He's given up. A lot of these dogs haven't given up. They've just got a low-grade crack, but they just don't want to drive, especially if it's in their drive leg. So they'll be slow to start, they'll be slow in the straights. And then they go, oh yeah, they're cornering okay now. That's because they're taking the weight off it. Now this one here, that would need a little screw, and it'd probably be 6 weeks and it'd heal. But we've seen these where the dogs have had the injuries probably for 8 months. That's how long that little crack will just stay there and be a little problem. Now let's look at the front leg. It's really like a running blade in the fact that the shoulder, the elbow, and the wrist, they all work together. Meaning they all extend together and they all flex together. So if you get a problem in any one of those, and most of the driving is occurring from the shoulder, the neck, shoulder muscles, chest muscles there, they push in that dog, helping cornering, but they powering through. That's where the power is. But suddenly if that muscle, the shoulder gets tight, and there's multiple reasons for that which we'll talk about, if that doesn't fully extend, yet that dog still has to go around a corner and has to extend a 1.5 meters. If the shoulder's not extending, the elbow has to extend more than it needs, which will actually pull up on the bicep muscle, which is a commonly, very rarely torn, but a very commonly spasmed muscle that if you're not checking it, you don't realise that's why the elbow's locked and the shoulder won't extend because the bicep's locked up in there. So the poor old wrist, it overextends and it becomes vulnerable to injury. So we get looseness, we get overstretching here, and unlike the hock, which has those 4 joints where the top joint in the hock, all the movement occurs. 90% of the hock movement occurs in the top joint that never gets into the greyhound. 10% of the movement in the hock are those 3 joints where the injuries occur. So they need to be held close together and compressed. This is why strapping works so well in hocks, but more challenging in the wrist, because the wrist has 3 joints, but those joints have to move an incredible amount of range. So like from there, I'll show you another one of those in a sec. So this is just showing that combination. This is when they're flexed. See, flexes, flex, flex, and then we go to extend. Now this dog's not fully extending that shoulder, yet it still has to go around a corner, so it's going to overstretch through the wrist, and we're getting wrist problems because of predominantly shoulder issues. I'll turn the video down on this so I can talk as we go. Neck and shoulder. A lot of the shoulders will be influenced if there's any tightness in the neck or between the shoulder blades. Just testing the mobility of the neck, make sure there's no stiffness there. There's the shoulder, there's the elbow. This is stretching the bicep. See, extension of the shoulder, flexing the wrist. That's a basic. Compare one side to the other. 90% of your stiff shoulders will be the right shoulder. So you've got a dog there, you can test both sides. Go to this one as well. Palpating, it's the elbow. Now there's the muscle down the back, that joins on the back of the stopper bone. Checking for wrist stiffness. Now if they're sore on this wrist when you flex them, it doesn't necessarily mean, most of the time the pain's not in the wrist. Most of the time it's stiffness coming down from the shoulder or the neck. And what I was doing there was stretching on the toes. If the toes don't stretch up properly, you've got stiffness at the back as well. Feeling the bicep and feeling the muscle group in here. This is the critical zone in the right side of the greyhound. I see a lot of dogs that when they jump, they drift to the right. Dogs that are slowing on corners. Everyone checks the pin muscles, the triceps at the back, but a lot of people aren't checking on the inside of the shoulder. Because the inside of the shoulder, the main three muscles that insert there that will cause the shoulder to be stiff will be the chest muscle, the pectoral, which comes through here, the joint's in there. The muscle that's under the shoulder blade, which is called the subscapular, below the scapula. So if you go to bounce the dog's shoulder and it's stiff, that muscle is stuck. And the other one is the pin itself. If you're getting tension in the pin and it keeps being sore in the pin has it's almost like a secret branch called the accessory branch that runs behind the shoulder to the inside, the medial side of the shoulder with those other three muscle groups. So when one of those is spasming, sometimes the other two go out in sympathy with it. And that's a common one that will put a dry needle in or inject a bit of local anaesthetic, and it's a good one to act if you need a short bit of cortisone. Cortisone's effective, short-acting cortisone is very good if there's scar tissue or thickening that you need to help break down scar tissue to get the range of motion back in. This is a critical one there, critical one. This is an example of what can happen to the wrist because it overstretches and over-rotates. Up again, full extension, back of the line, full extension, rotate immediately, solid, laterally, it wants to give. It's moving that way. And you actually feel it. Just take it back a little bit for us. You actually feel the toes. There's more movement compared to rocking digit 2, digit 3, digit 4, digit 5. Actually, it's actually looser in this dog. So what I was trying to show there is, and to do this test, you have to fully extend his wrist, overextend it almost, hold the top, it's like giving it a Chinese burn to see whether compare the movement rocking this way to rocking that way, and then do the other leg. Now a lot of dogs that keep going sore in the stopper bone, and they can be very sore, you x-ray them, there's no obvious chip, you put a bit of cortisone in the joint, it settles down, 3-4 weeks later they're sore again. Cortisone's worn off, you can't keep putting cortisone in, and you start strapping the wrist, and that's why we're talking about developing a strap for this problem. It's not as easy to strap the wrist as Dr. Annie's about to find out, because that's what we're looking at, than it is to strap a Hock. But this is laxity, this is rotational laxity that's occurred because that dog is overstretched because his shoulder's generally been tight, his foot might have gone in a hole, it's the outside leg, so most of the time this problem is in the outside leg, it's working hard, it's probably hit some soft sand compared to the inside leg, and it's twisted, over twisted, and the tendons down the front stretch like spaghetti. They don't have the one tendon, like the Hock has the one tendon down the centre and another one that goes, we call it the seat belt. This one has 4 down the front that aren't attached to anything. They're vertically come down. When you open up the skin here, because we've started an interesting technique, we're actually tightening the tendons on the outside. We've done a few of these cases here now, Alicia and myself. We're quite happy with the results. But this is, well, I also suspect that when this is loose, that these dogs may over-rotate, and this may be predisposing to the fractures. There's horrific fractures that happen up here above the wrist. Okay? These are dogs that are breaking this bone here without interference, that are running around a track and suddenly come off holding that leg. They're getting a few of those up at Q2, because I suspect they admitted they had drainage problems. Drainage problems means that when they run around a corner, there's not consistency of the track. They're hitting a wet spot or they're hitting a dry spot. The dog runs at a certain speed because he adjusts his running, whether he's running on a wet track or a dry track. Suddenly he hits something that's different and the legs suddenly pop. There's no time to adjust acceleration or running pattern. When I did tracks, Gosford was probably, at one stage, was probably the most treacherous tracks out compared to Cessnock and Maitland that I was doing. And there was always a safe track when it was raining the day before, so the track was saturated, but it was consistently saturated, in my opinion. Okay, you get more variation, and there's no doubt GWIC statistics, quarterly statistics have shown there are more fractures occurring in summer. Why is that? It's hotter and it's drier. It's as simple as that. So the future, well, the future is that we want to try to prevent these horrific wrist injuries that cause low-grade arthritis and really, Hock fractures. The thing is, that dog with a horrific fracture of the plantar rupture with the 2 plates on it, once that all heals, the main hinge joint still functions. The dogs are quite happy. They're paddock sound. You never go to stand up and stress the racing again, that's particular injuries, but a lot of Hock fractures will come back and race as long as the dog's not too old when he does it. Unfortunately, most of the dogs when they fracture their hocks are closer to 3.5 anyway. So when we do Hock fracture repairs on dogs that are 2.5 or 3, they generally come back and race successfully. So the big issue and the frustrating issue is these wrist fractures, either the accessory carpal bone fractures, which in my opinion are really quite preventable if we work on our shoulders and stop the loading through the back of the carpus, and also the potential to stop these fractures, the big fractures of the radius and the ulna. So this is, this was only last week, Greyhound Racing New South Wales approached Meg Brownlow might have approached them, who knows with Meg, she's a bit of a wonder. She gets things moving, Meg. And myself, and we went down to Andy Lord's place, we started looking at the strapping, and we've got our new vet on board as well, Andy, which is great, to look at the feasibility of strapping. But at least if we don't get a reliable compressive strap, we worked out a figure of 8 way we can strap, and also how we can at least be aware of the injury so we can try to manage it ourselves. Okay? Well, that's it. Thank you for your patience. That was my beautiful greyhound Star. That I repaired her femur. She never got to race. She ran it. She broke her leg running into another litter mate. The other litter mate was a white dog. Its fracture was horrific. The femur shattered on this white dog. We had to amputate the leg. We put her up on Facebook. 5 people wanted her. Star had a similar fracture, but put a plate on it and a pin, and it healed well. Nobody wanted it because 90% of dogs are this colour, and everyone wants a brindle, everyone wants a blue. There's lots and lots of black dogs. So I kept a beautiful dog, and that was my first greyhound. I've never raced greyhounds. I have no interest in racing greyhounds. I've just had an interest in helping greyhounds and helping trainers understand their injuries and try to prevent their injuries. Because not only are you going to prevent injuries, you actually make the dogs run better. That's the key. All right. All right, guys. Anything else?